Hey, that sounds like a fire.
What is it?
Take a look. Hey, fire engine. What? Wow, a whole bunch of them. Gee, would you believe that there was a time in my life when I couldn't wait to become a fireman? So I could slide down that brass pole, then, guide that hook and ladder truck, and feed that little spotted dog. It must be close.
I don't see a fire.
Well, let's see which way they turned. Oh, gosh, they didn't.
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive, history nerd, WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I'm Mike Grasso, and with me, as always, is my podcast partner, Rob McDougall.
Booger! I just wanted to get that in before the end of the podcast.
There you go, yeah. We've got 2 episodes of WKRP tonight to talk about. We've got Fire and then Dear Liar. And it's kind of nice because they do rhyme.
2 rhyming episodes.
So we're going to start off with Fire. And this episode is the tale of the fire that breaks out on the 5th floor of the Flim building, which provides Les with an opportunity to do some patented alliteration during his announcement that the Flim building is on fire. And
do we have a canonical height of the Flim building, and is WKRP at the very top, or is there anything above it?
I don't know if we know. Maybe in I Am Woman there was a mention of how tall the building was, how many stories there were. But I will mention WKRP is on the 14th floor, which in most big buildings, Rob, would actually be technically the 13th floor because of the fact that there's no 13.
Very good. Yes.
So I don't know if that means that WKRP is, unlucky or cursed.
Well, sure. That's got to go in the canon. Yep.
I think so. Yeah. So, the curse that happens in this episode is that it's quitting time. It's Friday, 5:30. Everybody's heading out to various weekend activities. Jennifer and Herb, Herb's kind of pestering Jennifer again. They enter the elevator together, not knowing that there is an inferno on 5 below them, and they get stuck in the elevator for almost the entirety of this episode.
An inferno. There's a strong implication that it's not that much of an inferno. What's the opposite of towering? It's
a cowering inferno.
You're on fire, pun intended tonight.
Oh my God.
I was going to say a smoldering inferno, but cowering is better.
So there's probably just a little tiny waste paper basket fire on the 5th floor, but it's creating a lot of smoke. And basically, as the elevator gets stuck, Jennifer and Herb get trapped in the elevator. A lot of panic and a lot of, a heart-to-heart ensues. But all the while, the rest of the staff of WKRP is mounting a daring rescue to get Jennifer and Herb out of the elevator.
And they're stuck too, or at least they think they're stuck.
They've got a lot of
there's smoke in the stairwell.
Yes, exactly.
But yes, a daring rescue. Johnny is lowered down on a fire hose to rescue them from the classic man and a woman trapped together in an elevator. That's meant to, of course, be titillating and exciting. We'll talk about it. They actually don't push that side of it as much as you might think.
No, they don't. And I think both of us were kind of waiting for this episode, Rob, mostly for that reason. The fact that we remembered that Jennifer and Herb have this sort of they make this connection again, and being stuck in the elevator together means that they kind of reveal their secrets to each other. There was actually a lot less of that in this episode than I had remembered or expected.
Absolutely. You hear this synopsis of the episode and you think, oh, it's like a two-hander, a bottle episode where they're locked in this one room for the whole time. It really isn't that.
Yeah.
We joked about the cowering inferno. Yeah, not only is the fire not really that terrifying, not intended to be that terrifying, except for maybe for a few moments, but I think the episode is pretty close to being in real time.
Yeah.
Which means that Herb and Jennifer are, stuck in the elevator for about 15 minutes.
Yeah,
20
exactly.
minutes tops,
And, we know that Bailey is still going to be able to get to the bank to deposit her check by the end of the episode. She says, I'm going to rush out and get it, because at the beginning of the episode...
That's a relic from a different era there, right?
Yeah.
That was a thing on Friday afternoon. Bailey's got to get to the bank before 5 p.m. or all her checks will bounce all over town.
Yeah, that was really, really great, and another sort of little ticket to the past there. But,
I think about that all the time. I think about how like it's just so alien to our experience now that there would be any friction between you and spending your money. Right? Like that the world, because I mean, Bailey wants to make sure she covers her checks, but the much more common thing on the Friday afternoon is
cash.
You got to get to the bank before 5 to get cash, or you can't spend money all weekend.
Right.
And
because you're not going to be a fancy guy with like credit cards in your wallet like Herb was at the restaurant with Jennifer a few weeks ago.
Yeah. In 21st century America, the fact that like anyone would prevent you from spending money, for like make it inconvenient at all for you to spend money, is just hard to comprehend.
And he says, payday, let's party. One problem, no cash. So then he says, bank's probably closed, right? I nod. No problem, let's go. Where? Money Mart. Well, I'm skeptical, but... Oh, it doesn't cost that much, like $3 on a hunt, and it's open late. Okay, Money Mart. So we check it out. It's great. Close by, 0 lineups, serious convenience. Hey, a little cash helps the weekend go smoothly.
I really love that bit at the beginning where it's another hanging out sequence there, where they're just sort of like, it's a quitting time. Bailey and the big guy get to the elevator at the same time, and then Jennifer and Herb get in. And then when the fire breaks out, we learn a little bit about the big guy's childhood dreams. He's
That's pretty adorable. The big guy, time in my life when I couldn't wait to become a fireman, and he goes through all the, drive the ladder truck and the.
Oh, I mean, I said in the notes, it's positively Ray Stancian of him to, want to have a little firehouse of his own to slide down the pole in.
Yeah, but you're right about the opening scene having that, another one of those sort of loose hanging out. Everyone's quitting work.
Yeah.
Johnny shows up 12 hours early by accident.
He doesn't have a alarm clock like a digital one with the AM and the PM on it yet. He's still got an old 1950s alarm clock.
All this is happening in a set we've never seen before. This hallway outside the elevator.
Yeah.
So there's 2 new sets in this episode. They're not fancy sets by any means, but there's an elevator and there's a sort of, I found the whole episode kind of dimly lit.
Yeah, definitely.
Low key.
Yeah.
The whole episode was kind of, considering it's an episode about a fire, it was kind of a low-key, quiet episode, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I mean, again, the idea here is that you're right, you're flipping back and forth between 2 different sets. The panic that's happening in the elevator, again, it's all kind of claustrophobic. They're kind of trapped together. Herb starts taking off his clothes because he's feeling the sort of phantom heat of the fire underneath him, and Jennifer says,
"I don't want to die in this suit."
Yeah. But then upstairs, right, there's a lot of zaniness, right? Johnny is the guy who's going to go down the elevator shaft, clinging to this fire hose, which Venus just wanted to have as much safety around him as possible. He drags the fire hose into the lobby, drags it out, and they end up using it as this rudimentary sort of rescue apparatus. And
Venus is just carrying it because he feels better holding it.
It's a security
in case things burst into flames, he'll be able to put it out. But then Johnny, I know you're not supposed to overthink this, but wouldn't that be extremely dangerous to climb into an elevator shaft?
Actually, the tensile strength of a standard 1978 fire hose is, no, you're right, it is. It's incredible. But again, this is, the daring do that Johnny kind of exhibits here is great. And I have this feeling, remember that TV Guide interview with Howard Hessman about how he was the guy with the great physique and he goes scuba diving in Hawaii and stuff like that. Do you think that when they were writing this episode, Howard peeked his head in and said, "Hey, can I go down the elevator shaft? Can I be the big swinging hero here and take Jennifer and Herb out of there?"
I hadn't thought of it in relation to his physique.
Yes.
Funny you mentioned the scuba diving because Andy is all excited because Andy is going to be snorkeling with a stewardess all weekend.
He's having a Caribbean vacation. Exactly. This is that time period when everybody was starting to go to Jamaica and the Caribbean, right?
But I do think that Howard Hessman is always happy to ham it up.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
And for him to just sort of be, The whole scene is just you suspended in an elevator shaft talking to yourself.
Yes.
He's like, sign me up. and the fact that he's sort of like the hero who saves the day.
He wasn't even supposed to be here.
He wasn't. That's right. He wasn't. It's Die Hard. This whole episode is Die Hard.
Oh my God.
He's like going through the elevator shaft, and he's like
saying quips to himself. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. This is.
I think we cracked it. Yeah. This is where they got the idea for Bruce Willis and Die Hard. Yeah. Absolutely.
How did Johnny fix the elevator?
He hotwired it.
He hotwired the elevator. Okay, all right. He didn't just like hit it. I had this idea that he was like the Fonz, and he just like thumped it, and it
No, because
fixed.
he was holding onto the wires, and he got a little bit of a jolt. And
that's
Howard
right,
Hessman got to do his I'm being electrocuted improv.
He gets right. In addition to his, Hessman's getting lots of fun things to do. I had thought that he just hit it, and I was added to what we just said about Johnny getting to be the big hero in this episode.
Yeah,
we talk about wishing that WKRP ran longer, but it's quite possible that if WKRP say ran for 10 years or whatever, that Johnny's character would have just continued to get bigger and bigger,
Yep.
Fonz-like, and so like by 1984 he'd be, I want to say jumping the shark, but something different. Like he'd be roller skating over the manatee or something like that,
Well, yeah, because they're obviously going to all go on vacation to, Florida at the same time, right?
Yes, and a mad scientist will switch their brains and all that kind of stuff. Be careful what you wish for is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I
if
think so.
WKRP had run for, 12 seasons, there's no telling what it could have become.
Tarzan won't be free this place. Tarzan, fine ladder. Tarzan, no need silly fire hose.
I mean, I think this could have aired in the first season, maybe the early second season. I mean, it wouldn't have been the same, but like we talked about this before the podcast, but like comparing this to Tornado is actually really interesting.
Well, it kind of did run in the first.
Yeah.
Was Tornado the second season, first or second season?
First season, yeah.
First season. So yeah, that's an interesting comparison because it's the disaster episode and. Well, yeah. What do you think? Because they're very different in feel.
Yeah, we pegged Tornado back in the first season as a 70s disaster movie.
Yes.
There were guest stars who didn't speak English, and there was, a big event at the act break, and, Andy's laid out on a table, and that sort of...
Right, you got Japanese tourists coming through, you got the interpreter.
It's jam-packed.
It's meant to be real jeopardy that, oh my God, is Andy going to be okay?
Yeah. Is the kid on the phone going to be okay?
The kid on the phone,
guy?
right?
Yeah.
It tugs at your heartstrings. That's right.
This one's much more low-key, though, like you said earlier at the very outset. It's a character piece. While there is a little bit of risk, I love the studio audience's little gasp when Johnny gets dropped further in the shaft, when the doors shut upstairs, when the power goes out. It's great. They go, ooh. And it's just sort of like, and again, Hessman's doing his own stunts. But this one's much lower stakes, and it's much less packed. There's more room for every one of these scenes, even the quote-unquote action scenes, to breathe a little.
Yeah, so it ends up being, it really isn't about, oh my God, are they going to be okay? Like Herb gets scared for a little while, Jennifer gets scared for a little while, Johnny does get dropped a floor or two, but the episode isn't really drawing a lot of power from, oh, I hope they don't get burned alive.
Yeah.
It is a character piece, and it's sort of it's weird. It's got this kind of like, we're all hanging out after work vibe,
Yes.
Even when there's a fire. And we talked about the opening scene. I also felt that the very end of the episode has that feel too, because, the episode might have ended once they're rescued with a big sort of catharsis. But then there's like a whole other scene where everyone's sort of like, well, I guess I should go. Bailey's like, I can still make it to the bank, like just to show the stakes are so small.
Yeah. Even the fire officer's kind of like, just, take it easy, stay low, which leads to another great sort of visual gag as Les does his entire rest of his broadcast from basically beneath the desk.
Stop, drop, and roll from down low where there's no smoke, or there wouldn't be smoke. Yeah, just his hand reaching up. I also do like when he's asking the tough questions to the fireman on the phone. He's like, Officer Shanks, explain fire. Just got a laugh from me.
It was a great line. And then I thought to myself, well, could I explain fire if I was asked to do so? I'd probably have to take recourse to Wikipedia to do that.
I believe it is rapid oxidization.
Yes,
but
it's
don't
plasma.
ask me any follow-up questions. Oh, the phlogiston.
There's ether involved somehow. Exactly.
Are we going to the puppy parade or not? Because it's starting to feel like a bottle episode.
Again with the TV crap. Hey, Meatball, did you take Annie's pen to make life more like Benny Hill or whatever you do?
Stop it.
I wouldn't do that. I hate bottle episodes. They're wall-to-wall facial expression and emotional nuance. I might as well sit in the corner with a bucket on my head.
It's funny that both you and I misremembered this episode in the same way.
Yeah.
In that we were picturing an episode where after a little bit of setup at the beginning and then the denouement at the end, the whole middle was Herb and Jennifer trapped in an elevator together.
Yeah.
And you could totally see WKRP doing that because they, trapped in an elevator with Jennifer is a kind of titillating, thing that they think is fun.
Yeah.
But also because that is kind of a classic sitcom setup or a classic TV episode setup, which is, what they call the bottle episode.
Yeah, I guess if it were Herb and Jennifer throughout the middle of the episode, like you're describing, you could call it a bottle episode. But this is like a Klein bottle episode. There's like two sets that are kind of linked somehow, and it's kind of like the bottle episode is sort of historically thought to have come about just to kind of when a series has done a lot of location shooting or they've done a lot of high budget episodes that they have to kind of bring it all back down and do a episode in one room or one set. And it's a little ship in a bottle, right? It's a bottle episode.
Right. A bottle episode. The idea, that you save money, you take just the regular cast or just a few people and you trap them in an enclosed space, which is one set.
Yeah.
And so there's a way in which it is very, it's cheap to make.
Yeah.
At least classically. But then there's another way in which it's kind of bravura from a writing point of view, from a writing and acting point of view. And so sometimes bottle episodes are really standout episodes, end up being kind of powerful, cool episodes.
Character focused, obviously.
Exactly. Character focused, sort of like a play, like a two-hander, like a play. So, like things like Mad Men, The Suitcase, the episode that is just...
Which does bounce around a little bit now that I'm thinking about... Rob, I'm beginning to think that the bottle episode, its brand is being diluted a little bit in recent years. I think that people are just throwing episodes in where there's 4 or 5 sets, because they go down to the restaurant, they go down to, they go into Roger's office, like they use the entire space. It's just that
I guess that's on Mad Men. They're not trying to save money. That is So Mad Men, when they do a bottle episode, it is all about the sort of bravura-ness of the, similarly, the bottle episode that from sitcoms, the sort of famous bottle episode is the Chinese restaurant episode of Seinfeld.
Yes, that one qualifies. If I'm going to give it my imprimatur, that one definitely works.
But they had to build a Chinese restaurant set. Like, I don't think that they did that in order to save money. I think that they did that because for Seinfeld and Larry David, the challenge was like, can we write an episode
where
where they're just waiting the whole time to get a table at a Chinese restaurant?
Well, I think that we get the impression about the whole budget thing probably from the science fiction shows that use bottle episodes. Because if you've blown your sort of effects budget on, Deep Space Nine holding off the Cardassians or something like that, then occasionally you're going to need an episode where you go out to the local ballpark and, play baseball against the Vulcan ship. You know what I mean?
Well, is that so? I mean,
is the holodeck a bottle episode? Because usually it's just them using whatever sets they've got around, like the 1940s, noir set, or going out to the park and having the characters play the Robin Hood characters, because Q has kidnapped them, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, no, in fact, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the name comes from like a literal original Star Trek episode where they're in a bottle or something like that. The bottle city of Kandor or Superman.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a literal bottle where, the man who lived in a box kind of thing.
But when you talk about the suitcase, I mean, that's kind of like that. And I think the Breaking Bad episode, The Fly, like those two of the kind of like the recent, new golden age of TV, those two, I think, are probably the most famous ones. And again, they are literally two-handers, with the exception, again, of bits of the Mad Men episode. But like, that episode in the lab is just Walt and Jesse trying to hunt a fly, and I think it was explicitly called out by the producers at the time as a, cost-saving, time-saving episode, which, makes sense because they had a lot of location shooting on that show.
Yeah, so I think we are conflating two things, which is one is sort of the writerly challenge of like, and writer and actorly challenge of like, can we hold people's attention just by holding them in one place? And a sort of old school, like, oh, you blew your budget on that rubber lizard suit, last time. You gotta just, play baseball this episode. I mean, because for WKRP, many episodes of WKRP, almost all episodes of WKRP take place solely in the already established sets. Yeah. So they're not saving any money by building an elevator set.
And, we've kind of talked about this before, like when it comes to these 70s sitcoms that have these, grungy, realistic sets, right? And I think to kind of like the sitcoms of the 80s, when they went back to the sort of the family thing with a couple of exceptions, we never ever go outside the Huxtables. We never ever go outside the Keatons. Like,
you know what they would do is that people would come to them.
Yes, exactly.
Like Ben Vereen came to visit the Huxtables, and
exactly.
Sammy Davis Jr. came to visit.
Here's your other grandfather who's also a famous jazz musician. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, again, like we never went to Skippy's house on Family Ties. We never saw any of any of the Seavers friends on Growing Pains houses. It was just always, and that was a throwback to the 50s. I mean, can you imagine how inexpensive it was to produce a family sitcom in the 1950s? And how expensive probably things got in the 60s in that silver age when you had robots on Gilligan's Island and you had special effects for Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. Like, that must have really started blowing the budgets at that point. And I think that makes sense when you think about the history of television. In the 50s, they had to do everything on the cheap because it was a brand new medium. But by the 60s, all that money has kind of come into the to the industry.
Island, was that like a big budget show? Because like half of it's outside, and
they definitely had some because they had the lagoon, right?
Because it was, or is that a soundstage? I don't even know. But
God, that's amazing! If that was a soundstage, that was some serious engineering to have an entire lagoon in
whole
there.
Island.
You know what this is?
Yep.
Lockdown! Op-ed, seal the doors. Nobody leaves until this pen shows up.
I don't like this.
Yeah, tell it to the pen you might have. Gwynnifer, hi. Yeah, it's me. I can't make it. Well, tell your disappointment to suck it. I'm doing a bottle episode.
Well, I have ideas. I'm full of good ideas for future WKRP episodes.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't call it fan fiction.
Yes,
these are just my ideas.
These are just campaigns that you want to run.
Yeah, right. Game ideas. Yeah. I think it would be cool if WKRP had done like a for real bottle episode. Like I was thinking about like they could do like a whole episode on the air, like just in the booth.
Yeah.
And like it could be some dramatic situation, like, someone's talking someone down off a ledge or something. But I actually just I'd love to see an episode that's just like a broadcast day at WKRP.
Yeah.
And it starts in the morning. And so it just shows you the booth and you see Johnny coming in and he does his thing. And then like at each act break, we jump to the noon news and then we jump to the afternoon and we end with Venus.
Yeah.
But, you work something funny, a bunch of funny things are going on either in the news and in the station, and just like do the whole episode. Like, Hugh Wilson, call me.
You're right. You would never need to leave the booth because you could come up with an excuse for all 8 characters to make their way there. And again, maybe it could be something like, something's getting passed between them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you kind of follow the course of something throughout the day. It's a brilliant idea. I mean, again, like you can still get multi-camera setups in that studio set, the booth set, because you can get different angles. So you wouldn't necessarily get bored. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the challenge with a tight bottle episode is that, again, you're kind of stuck in the same place. Unless your actors are really, really fantastic, you're going to have some tough time keeping people interested.
Hello, Tim.
How are you doing?
Just fine. I've watched you run, and you run like a gazelle. I gotta tell you, you're beautiful. How do you feel about this obstacle course?
Well, they've changed it since I've done it last, and I don't know. This is going to have to be let's wait and see on this one.
So you have done it once before.
Yeah.
How did you do?
I did pretty well. I had about an 18.9, which was a record for about 2 events, but
that was
much different.
This was against Scott Baio?
No. He broke my record many, many moons ago. He's got youth on his side.
I see. Okay, well, good luck.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye. Hello, Scott.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you feeling?
I'm okay. My shoulder's a little stiff, but it's fine.
Yeah, have you tried this out today?
Yeah, I was working earlier on it.
Okay.
I don't know.
You're the king of the heap here.
Please,
How do you
don't say
feel?
that.
How do you feel about being
See,
king of the
see
heap?
you guys do to me. Come on. I feel rotten now. Let me tell you something.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that. No. I wish you all the best. And I know
you.
the last time I saw you, you literally flew over that wall.
So as Andy, Bailey, the big guy, and Venus are lowering Johnny down using the aforementioned fire hose, and I saw the four of them all kind of, giving their all to keep Johnny from plummeting to his doom in the elevator shaft. I thought to myself, this looks awfully familiar. And there's Tim Reed I think he was even at the anchor spot. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is like the tug of war at the end of an episode of Battle of the Network Stars. It's a stretch. You'll have to stick with me on this. But I think I was thinking about it because there was this recent
Seeing Tim Reed and Jan Smithers pulling on a rope.
Yes.
That just
it
calls up an image.
It certainly does. I mean, listen, I was raised on TV, blah blah blah. It's all stuck in my head. All the sort of images. The reason why I think I had it on my mind though is because there was this great AV Club oral history recently of the Battle of the Network Stars from beginning to end, basically the entire history of its run. And Tim Reed really is a very prominent figure in this set of interviews. I was really pleased to see him talking about his experiences on the show.
He was really prominent on Battle of the Network Stars. I think he was probably maybe a better athlete than many sitcom actors.
I think that actually may have been part of the oral history, was that people were kind of commenting on the relative athleticism of some of the folks there. But I got to tell you, Rob, Battle of the Network Stars was one of my favorite shows, and it probably doesn't surprise you. I mean, here's the thing. Being a fan of TV, kind of quad TV at that age, I love the idea that the networks had teams. I love the fact that they had not only teams, but team loyalty. Like some of these actors took this really seriously.
What network was Battle of the Network Stars aired on?
I think it would have to have been on ABC because Howard Cosell was doing the play-by-play. So
didn't they
he was an ABC
weren't
guy.
there concerns about
to get a home
team advantage? I already complained about the Family Feud giving Love Boat clear preferential treatment.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and Love Boat was another ABC show, and it makes sense. ABC was on the top back then, right? They were in that late 70s, early 80s, before sort of that Cosby Show sort of ascendancy of NBC. They were the network to beat.
Well, look here on this oral history. It has Tim Reed saying, for years he held the record on the obstacle course until Scott Baio took it away from him. Boo.
Yeah, that's bad news.
Scott Baio, who would have been an ABC star, because Happy Days.
Happy Days.
ABC.
And Joni loves Chachi. Don't forget that.
She did love Chachi. Go figure.
There is a great story about Robert Hegyes, Epstein's dog. Did you read that bit?
No.
So Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, Washington from Welcome Back, Kotter, was saying yeah, one day Robert brought his dog named Reefer to the set, and I'm like, man, they are gonna know what you are all about now.
I wonder on air would they change the dog's name or something? Standards and practices would be like, can you call him Kiefer?
Yeah, right. I think they were more afraid of looking like horrible sort of stoned teenagers in front of
in front of their bosses,
in front of Robert Vaughn and the rest of them.
No, I mean the story that Tim Reed tells is about talking to Howard Cosell after Cosell had gotten in trouble.
Oh yeah,
for calling.
It was a wide receiver for the Redskins, I think, and
yes, that's right, Alvin Garrett, and he called him a monkey. He said that something like that little monkey sure is fast, isn't he?
He was basically climbing up on top of another player to grab a ball, basically, and that comparison obviously was very ill advised, but said in the heat of the moment. And as you say, Tim Reed talked to him afterwards, right?
Yeah, so Tim Reed was wondering how he was going to respond. He hadn't talked to him since that event. I guess they were friends enough, and Cosell was telling Tim Reed about what a hard experience it had been for him to get in trouble for his racist comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Tim Reed called him a monkey. He said, "Oh, Howard, you little monkey," or something like that, which apparently defused the situation.
It sounds like the kind of way they would defuse racial tension in WKRP. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's like Tim Reed's superpower, right? Is like being the bigger man and finding a cool way to diffuse some racist thing that a white person has said or done.
I found it interesting that at least 4 or 5 of the titular network stars were more than willing to tell us that they did this not for the pride of the network, but because if you won, you made a lot of money. And that really gets me thinking. I mean, if that's the case, if $40,000 purse was enough to make these people like run their fastest and set records on the obstacle course, man, what were these people making on network sitcoms back in the late 70s and early 80s? If that was like, the reason why they did Battle of the Network Stars was to get a paycheck.
Yeah, well, you look at the list and like
there's no headliners, right?
Henry Winkler and Howard Hessman aren't doing
That's
it,
true.
That's
and
true. It is your Scott Baio's and your Tim Reeds and your LeVar Burtons. LeVar Burton's here quoted in the story says, "Hal Linden is right. The tug of war. That's when the shit got real."
Oh man, you can just hear the music sting coming in.
This is a great article, folks. We're not going to read every good quote out of the article, but it's a great.
But listen, if you've got a favorite star from a TV show from this particular time period, they are probably represented in here somewhere. So it is a great article.
What a nice kid. Grew up in Brooklyn. Scott Baio. Tim Reed, what a nice man. He's right though. Baio has youth on his side. There they go. Look at Baio go under the net. Now the tires. Look at his feet go. Look, the monkey bars. No problem. Hey, a little problem getting to the wall, but up and over it with that gazelle-like grace. Then the water hole. And then in. And notice he took the water hole on the rope with his right hand. Scott Baio. Top of the heap, king of the hill, number one. You were sensational, bad shoulder and all.
Thank you.
You go over that wall like a monkey, for heaven's sake.
So as aspiring fire marshal Arthur Carlson is surveying the fire scene before they find out that the fire is actually in the Flynn building, he says something about it's going to be that chili parlor down the street. They've been having problems,
They're a fire waiting to happen.
They're a fire waiting to happen.
Yeah.
But this idea of a chili parlor I thought was kind of interesting. I kind of said to myself, well, is that because, there's more and more sort of Mexican and Tex-Mex places making their way up from the southwestern United States? But it's not that. It's the fact that Cincinnati has its own trademark tradition when it comes to chili.
Yes.
And that started at the Skyline Chili in the 1950s and kind of spread out to imitators and copycats in the years following. So Cincinnati chili is a thing. It has a bit of a checkered reputation.
Well, because it's not chili, so it's not actually ham. It's not actually chili.
I mean, it's a secret recipe. Skyline has kept their recipe completely secret through corporate takeovers and rebrandings over the years. But it's chili or, some approximation thereof placed onto spaghetti.
Or a hot dog.
Right?
A coney is a hot dog, but it's not like a chili dog because, again, it's not chili con carne. It's not like Texas chili.
Yes.
It's sort of like a meat sauce, right?
Yeah, I would say that's probably, it's a little more watery than you would want chili, that I would want chili to be. And it's really interesting because this Skyline Chili was a restaurant started by Greek immigrants, like a lot of, sort of neighborhood sub-sandwich shops or pizza places or whatever. And they kind of, used some of their Greek herbs and spices to make this Skyline Chili the sort of trademark trade secret that it is today. But you're right. Like, if you live outside of Cincinnati and you hear about Skyline Chili, you find yourself more often than not wondering what the appeal is. And I've not had it, but I have talked to people who have. And these are people from outside of Cincinnati. They have had it once, and they have never elected to have it again.
Well, obviously it has its fans. The
sure.
the Wikipedia page for not for Skyline chili, but the master page for Cincinnati chili is a marvel of sort of, often on Wikipedia they say citation needed, but there are sentences in this Wikipedia article that have like 18 footnotes, like it's
oh my God.
It's well documented. There's also, they explain the way system.
Oh right, yeah.
You get a 2-way is spaghetti chopped with chili, and a 3-way is spaghetti, chili, and cheese, but a 4-way is chili, cheese, and onions, and a 4-way bean is chili, cheese, and beans, and a 5-way is chili, cheese, onions, and beans.
But the fact that this was invented by a Greek immigrant and his family gets me thinking about another, let's say, acquired taste that was also developed by a Greek immigrant, which is the famous Hawaiian pizza.
Close to home, that's right. Next to Guy Lombardo, who I think we talked about an episode.
Yeah, we did.
Next to Guy Lombardo, London, Ontario's most beloved and also hated export is the Hawaiian, in scare quotes, because we're a long way from Hawaii, the Hawaiian pizza, which, at least according to local lore, was invented by a Greek restaurateur, diner or pizzeria opener named Sam Panopoulos.
Yeah.
Who?
Well, the thing is, like, I remember this now because, like, he had not originally started doing pizzas. He actually started doing Chinese, and that was the era of sort of the tiki, sort of Polynesian thing.
Yeah.
Where pineapple was kind of used in every dish, and they gave you a little plate of it afterwards after your Chinese meal.
Yeah, and pizza was like, it's funny to think of, but like there's a time in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada was so square and so bland in those days, Mike. Like, so they didn't.
Please, I want to hear about Canadian cuisine before, in the before times,
In the before times. So Panopoulos did an interview with Atlas Obscura, actually.
You're right.
Saying that pizza wasn't known at all, that you couldn't get pizza in Toronto, that you had to go to Detroit to get pizza.
Yeah.
That's sort of like, that was like, the exotic thing to go all the way to Detroit and get pizza. And basically it had, cheese, sauce, pepperoni.
Yeah.
And and it was 1962. He, I think, just like was looking at things he could get cheaply.
Yeah.
And throw on the pizza.
I mean, they both are like Hawaiian foods. I mean, a lot of Hawaiian cuisine uses pork.
Yep.
And the pineapple is obviously something that's cultivated in Hawaii. But this, to me, is sort of the beginning, I think, in my mind, as an Italian American. This is the beginning of the bastardization of the pizza. Let's be honest. Because this opens the door to California-style pizza in the 70s with chicken on it and all kinds of other stuff.
Yep.
And now we got a pizza place that opened up down the street. They have a breakfast pizza with like pancakes and bacon on it and stuff like that, and maple syrup. It's just like, I'm really kind of furious about this, and I feel that Sam Panopoulos kind of opened the door here.
And he's not even Italian. Like, this is a Greek Canadian. He had to figure that he wasn't going to get busted, because I just don't think there were any Italian Canadians in London,
Sure.
within miles of London in 1962.
That makes sense. I mean, listen, I'm a partisan. I like Greek style pizza, which I think, at least in the Northeast, is sort of that thicker, oilier, sort of crispier, crunchier crust, as opposed to like, your standard Italian New York style pie, which is, thin crust. But like, I believe me, I could go on. But here's the thing. I am not a fan of putting weird stuff on pizzas. And I know this is arbitrary, like what's weird, what's not. When I first went to England, the first time I had a pizza in England, we went to Pizza Express, a very popular sort of chain restaurant, kind of Olive Garden-y. And they often will have pizza with corn on it.
Yeah.
Little corn. Yeah. I was,
you don't care for that.
That was a bit of a bridge too far. And the look on my face may have doomed. I mean, I was so scared that I had doomed myself with my in-laws when they saw my look. When I saw the corn pizza come out, I was like, ooh, I don't know about this.
I like a good Hawaiian pizza.
So you are one of those people who really, really likes Hawaiian pizza.
Yeah. Like Hawaiian, the sweet and the savory. Sure. Bring it.
I'm the kind of person where if you've got a pork product that you're going to put on a pizza, this is making me sound like Les Nessman here. It's gonna have to be bacon, or it's gonna have to be sausage. I'm not a fan. I am not a fan of ham on a pizza.
I want to dedicate this episode of the podcast to the people who think we don't talk enough about WKRP and go off on too many tangents.
You start talking about pizza toppings and people get incensed. That is the lesson to be learned.
That's true.
My tour of the wards was something I'll not soon forget. Everywhere I looked were young faces filled with promise that will not be realized. Dreams that will never come true. But the event that summed up the experience for this reporter came as I was about to leave. I felt a tug on my skirt. At my shirt. And looked down into the face of a little boy named Bobby.
Well, our second episode this time around is called Dear Liar. And I guess the liar in question is Bailey, although it's not entirely clear. It's also less because what happens in this episode is that Bailey gets sent to do a human interest story on a children's hospital.
Northside Children's Clinic.
The controversial issue of children's hospitals. Are we in favor of children being sick or are we against it? And she makes up, when she writes up the story, she makes up a composite kid. She fabricates the end of the story. It's not clear she means to go on the air with it because we'll talk about this. There's a series of mishaps leads to, well, just the one mishap. Les reads the story on the air.
Yeah.
And then there's much consternation because this is, in fact, a kind of issue episode inspired by the real-life case of Janet Cook, who we'll also talk about later, but she was a Washington Post reporter who did just that, who fabricated, won a Pulitzer Prize, actually, for a story that turned out to be fabricated.
Yeah, this episode, I didn't hate it. I kind of enjoyed the sort of twists and turns it took, oddly enough. There were parts of it that I really despised, and I think one of the things we'll end up talking about, I think we both kind of agree, like, there's a lot of people being really, really horrible to each other, especially Les to Bailey, to just kind of like, Les sent Bailey off on this trip because he didn't want to have to do it. Oddly enough, it was Mama Carlson, who's apparently a big-time donor to the children's clinic, who told Andy to tell Les to do a story about it. It's a very convoluted sort of setup, but
it's convoluted because they're sort of doing contortions to try to avoid having anyone actually do the wrong thing. Like that's what I think anyway.
Yeah.
I think they are sort of nobody intentionally airs a fake story. Bailey types it out.
Yes.
And leaves it in the typewriter, and it's not clear what she intends to do with it. And then Les, not knowing, steals her story. This is the other weird thing about this episode, is that like there's actually two moral things going on here. Les comes and steals her story, or is he allowed to steal her story because he's the news director? I don't know, but he steals her story, airs it as his own.
Yeah.
And then the issue that the story is about, we're joking about it, like it's not a controversial issue. It's like kids' hospitals, for or against,
But it kind of links up with what we talked about during Jennifer and Johnny's charity, which is that people are feeling the pinch economically. When Bailey goes to interview the head of the clinic, she says that there's just no funding. Donations are down, all of this stuff. The reason why they want to have a story in the media is because people aren't giving to these kind of organizations anymore. So, for or against, we joke about it, but basically, like, they're dealing with a budget shortfall that's come from people not wanting to, support the clinic anymore.
That's right. And that ends up being sort of one more way in which they sort of defang the issue is that at the end of the episode, the woman from the hospital is delighted. They're not upset because the story worked and they got lots of donations. And
they get to sell multiple copies of the flower drawing that Bailey supposedly received from
Bobby
the composite.
Bailey,
yeah.
Quote, Bobby gave Bailey. I think I couldn't make heads or tails of this episode when I saw it as a kid.
Yeah, it could be very, I think I understood see, that's the thing. To me, the theft of Bailey's story almost looms larger than the idea of Bailey using a composite character. again, it is touching on that HUD button issue that you talked about. But listen, if somebody went onto my computer and took a half-finished thing I was working on and passed it off as their own, not only would I be upset about the theft, I'd be upset about somebody taking something that wasn't finished yet.
Right.
You know what I mean? That wasn't polished yet. And, you know, Bailey's, we know Bailey. She's got a typewriter at home. She writes a lot. She's an aspiring writer, author, and journalist. She should be allowed to have a first draft where she's trying to figure out exactly how to fit these kids into the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like for the whole episode, everyone is giving Bailey shit.
Yeah.
You know, like Jennifer's like, Bailey, we could lose our license. She's so shocked. Like, could they really lose their license for this? Maybe. But Les gets off pretty easily.
Yeah.
Andy tells him, he says, go look up the word plagiarism, and we get another Les with his dictionary joke. He goes and reveals that Les, in fact, does not know the definition of plagiarism because he goes and checks and comes back. But
it comes with a circular definition, right? Yeah.
But I mean, you said in the notes, like if anyone deserves to be fired, isn't it Les? I mean, Les stole the story and Les lied on the air.
Yes.
Bailey just typed something.
Yeah.
Right? Which wasn't true.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, again, maybe this is a different, like you were saying a little earlier, maybe Les has absolute domain over the news department, can do whatever he wants, can take unfinished pieces off of his, his reporters' desks. But like, maybe this is just me and my modern sort of like, I have never worked in an office where there are typewriters around where you can just read what everybody's working on and just tear it off of there dramatically and run to the studio to...
See, this would not have happened if they'd given Bailey a computer.
Yeah. She could have put up a 4-digit password and nobody would have been able to get in there
Uncrackable. Yeah. Type in password to get into the story. I mean, does a rock radio station even... do news stories like this? Like, is that just, we just have to overlook that? Like, this is, they're doing a journalism episode, so we got to pretend that they're real journalists.
Well, that does get me thinking of the fact that Andy and his sort of, standard shtick with Les is trying to get him to stop doing the agricultural stories. And there's a sort of B plot with Les and his desire to get another Buckeye Newshawk Award by doing an expose about rutabaga, the vanishing vegetable.
Yes, that's right. Because that's a pretty subtle callback, because not every viewer might remember that the Buckeye Newshawk Award is given to, let me see if I get this right from memory, is given to the best story on root vegetable production in the Cincinnati tri-state area.
That's right. Oh my God, that's some super continuity. I mean, there's also the fact that rutabaga is it's a funny word. It's also a funny prop. He gets to shake his rutabaga at Andy and vice versa throughout the episode. There's sort of a pass the hot rutabaga kind of
There's a lot of waving the rutabaga around and saying rutabaga. Yeah, it's a kind of a, even though it doesn't have any K's in it, it is clearly a classic Catskill comedy word.
Yes, Walla Walla,
exactly.
Washington.
Fun rutabaga fact. You know that outside of North America, they are not called rutabagas.
I do know this actually because we had some vegetable confusion one night here in the household, and what the heck?
They're called swedes,
right? That's what they're called.
Yeah, swedes.
Yeah.
Except for in Scotland, where I believe they are called neems.
Neems. Oh my God!
Right? Little fun fact for you folks: rutabagas,
knew?
Swedes, and neems.
Who knew we needed this
They're
many
all funny
names?
words.
They are. You're right. They are. I think it's sort of like the funniness of the word is sort of proportional to the bulbousness of whatever, You've got zucchini and you've got squash. Right. Those are some moderately funny words, but a rutabaga is sort of the
funny vegetables. That said, considering how funny the word is, I didn't actually find a lot of the rutabaga material that funny.
The rutabaga material was not funny. No, but it gets me thinking about why I started bringing up the rutabaga in the first place, which is the fact that, that whole rutabaga routine and the way Richard Sanders delivers sort of his first rutabaga expose at the very beginning of the episode, it felt very new WKRP to me. And I know I've only recently watched the 2 episodes we did for the April Fool's episode, but again, they took all of Les's mannerisms and sort of quirks and they turned them up to 11 on that series. And
yeah, it's overdone. Yeah, exactly. So, right, it's like someone that's what Les always does, is he does crazy news stories about vegetables and about agriculture. And so it's not like Les's other stories are subtle, but there's something about this is it does seem over the top, that whole bit. And Johnny's in the studio with them, and Johnny does this weird thing. He's just making fun of Les, but he like slips into a preacher character, and he's like, "Hallelujah, testify." And, and the whole bit is just sort of like, it seems like both Sanders and Hessman indulging some of their hammiest instincts, you know?
Yeah. I talked about this in our unbeloved review episode of season 1 about how much I loved Les as a kid, but how cold the character has left me, at least at the end of the first season. But it's been 4 seasons now, Rob, and I can pretty confidently say, like, I am super disappointed in how broad and unfunny Les can be.
Not always, but sometimes yes.
It's not always, but sometimes it just doesn't work, and it's kind of it is a bit of a bummer because I do remember just sort of like everything that he did. Again, maybe it was just appealing to the 10 or 11-year-old mind, like, you know, mispronouncing words and looking things up in the dictionary and being a pedant and all that other stuff. Like, that's, again, they're very broad comic tropes. They're very easy for someone who's younger to kind of understand and find funny.
Yeah, and then he's awful in this episode. He's awful to Bailey, and he steals her story. And then the other thing I always remember as a kid is that at the very end, he pulls the same stunt himself. He does a story with a presumably fictionalized composite hog at the end. Harold,
little Razorback hog named Harold. Yes.
Hog, yeah.
It's difficult to describe the feelings this reporter had as he walked through the pens, but I felt a tug on my pant leg, and I looked down into the face of Harold, a little Razorback hog, blind since birth.
So we have a mean Les, we have an Andy who's kind of like doing Mama's bidding explicitly at the station. We've got Bailey kind of being irresponsible with the way she's putting together her stories. Like, I think we saw this in the Jamie Wyman entry for this episode, but like the characters really aren't kind of hitting all their marks as far as what we expect from them in this episode.
Yeah, everyone seems a little bit out of character. Again, I found that weird Jennifer berating
the Jennifer
Bailey,
thing.
But we're going to lose our license. Like that, you know, someone else might say that. But yeah, everyone seems to be out of character. Jamie Wyman makes the nice point that even Mama Carlson is out of character in this episode, and she doesn't even appear.
That's true. She's not actually in the episode.
Because since when does she care about sick kids?
Is there a lot of big guy in this episode? There really isn't, is there?
There isn't that much, but even the big guy is... It's not so much that he's out of character, but he's in a different mode. He's in the sort of like, well, listen here, young lady. Like he's about to give Bailey a stern talking to.
Yeah, which again, we found, you know, already a little weird and suspect in season 2. You know what I mean? So.
Oh, and then Herb.
Oh, right.
Herb is barely in it. But he's going off to a convention, but he's bringing along his his joy buzzer and his light up tie and his whoopee cushion and his duck whistle.
Yeah.
Like when did Herb become a vaudeville comic?
Well, I mean, these are kind of like all uncle gags, and I think I've said before that like Herb definitely has that sort of like, hey, he's your, you know, cheesy uncle whose fashions are 10 years behind the times kind of thing. But like, I mean, that just doesn't seem like Herb. It's like a whole gag shop in his briefcase. It just doesn't seem... It seems too classless and tacky even for Herb, basically.
If editors think that they can avoid that, I take my hat off to them. There's absolutely no way you can avoid disaster if somebody wants to lie to you. There's no foolproof system. You can catch them in most of the lies, but that was such a lie that nobody could conceive of it. Also, there were some interesting things about that. There was an artist's drawing. You know, the story was about an 8-year-old heroin addict. There was an artist's drawing of that kid, and it was one of those extremely vivid pictures, and it ran on the front page of the paper. And I think it made us all feel that we knew this kid, Jimmy, a given name. Also, the mayor on the following day said he knew who Jimmy was. And any guard that we might have had went totally down when the mayor of your city says he knew it was. And there was a psychiatrist, I think, or a drug counselor at Howard University who said 2 days later that she was treating the family I mean, it didn't occur to us that it didn't exist. I mean, in light of those evidences.
So as you mentioned, Rob, this episode is largely based on a real-life case that took place right around this time, at the beginning of the 80s. And it's actually called out explicitly in the episode by Andy, right? He says, this is the woman named Janet Cook did this in Washington, D.C., and, she lost her job. Janet Cook, this is a weird story. Like, I knew the basic outlines of this because I kind of was anticipating this episode, but the cast of characters who is involved in this particular story is pretty amazing, because not only is former disgraced DC Mayor Marion Barry involved in this story,
right,
but also like the esteemed masthead of the Washington Post where Janet Cook worked.
Yeah, I think that's part of why this story hit so big. So Cook wrote a story in 1980 called Jimmy's World, which was sort of a profile describing the life of an 8-year-old heroin addict. And boy, I mean, that of course that's going to be powerful. Yeah. But he wasn't real.
Right.
It's not that there aren't heroin addicts and there aren't kids who are heroin addicts, I guess, but he was not real. He was a fabricated person. But people read the story and they immediately were like, well, let's help this kid, and went looking for him. And that's what Marion Barry was.
Because it would be a crime not to.
Yeah, exactly.
So
the mayor, Barry, was like, organized this all-out search for the boy. But then, you're right, heavy hitters in this story. The Post defended it. Her managing editor, who was no less than Bob Woodward, defended the story and submitted it for the Pulitzer Prize, which she won the 1981 Pulitzer Prize for journalism, which just meant that when the story finally unraveled, I think it unraveled like 2 days after the prize had been awarded.
Yeah.
That this was a huge black eye for the Post, for Woodward, and for the Pulitzer, and for journalism, and to the extent where WKRP felt that they had to weigh in on it.
Well, it is kind of, again, it allows you to do that low stakes, homely sort of version of it, right? But this, this story, I mean, I guess the reason why that Steve Marshall and the writers thought this would be a good way to go is because with Cook, it seemed like that she wanted to be kind of a crusading journalist, right? Like she wanted to make the plight of the urban youth in Washington, D.C. at this point evident to everyone.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, that was her motivation, right? Was to sort of like shine a light on this terrible social ill.
But again, like, there are cases where you can use a composite or an imaginary character and get away with it. This is not the kind of feature where you can do that. Like, you could think of a puff piece. You could think of something where you just need somebody on background. Like, all those situations, you could certainly do this. But this is a story about an 8-year-old child who's addicted to heroin. Like, I don't know what possesses someone to think that they can actually get away with something like that. Because like I said, that's going to get the authorities' feelers tingling no matter what, no matter how big it gets.
Yeah. And then, just what made this even messier is that Cook is African American, and which has no bearing except that after it happened, that became part of the story for so many people, and there was all this talk about affirmative action in the workroom, and and just this suspicion that that's what you get, sort of thing, and which just added this whole other level of cruddiness to the aftermath of this,
and the gender
and
aspect
of course,
too.
Right, a black woman,
that's sort of like. That's the one part of the story that gets replicated with Bailey is sort of, the idea that there's a maternal aspect. I mean, it even gets lampshaded when Les reads off the story and has to change all of the references to skirts and bearing, a child and all that.
And it's easy to sort of, again, there's it seems to play into some loaded gender assumptions about male journalist would be objective and dispassionate and committed to the truth, the sort of crusade for the truth. Yeah. But a woman journalist is inevitably going to be emotional and tug at your heartstrings, and that will lead her into the realm of fiction, which is the realm of,
But as we know from subsequent scandals of this type, Rob, it is certainly not exclusive to, female journalists, because two of the biggest cases that have happened in the last, I guess it's a decade and a half now, Jason Blair and Stephen Glass, both men, both who burnished their stories with falsehoods and half-truths.
Yes, if you look at these are both sort of in the early aughts, right? Or
early
Stephen
aughts,
Glass might have
right.
been the late 90s.
Yep.
But if you look at those stories, they are much worse, and they went much farther than Janet Cook, because she wrote one story and got busted.
Yeah.
Glass wrote like dozens of stories, completely manufactured, some partly manufactured, some completely manufactured.
Sure.
And even in order to cover it up, like went to the point of like creating websites for fake companies and like getting his brother to like pose on the phone as, you know, like he carried on in order to not get caught. You know, he like the deception got heavier and heavier. He was a writer at the New Republic.
Yes.
And then Jason Blair was a New York Times writer. So again, big institutions of American journalism, all with egg on their face or worse.
I think about the way you just described the Glass story. I haven't seen the movie. It came out again probably in the mid-aughts, but like
it's Anakin. He's Anakin Skywalker.
It's Hayden Christensen. Yeah, geez.
So if you didn't already hate him,
you're right. Janet Cook's situation limited to one story. When you have somebody like this, you have to wonder what the pathology is behind it, right? Because it feels like there's a compulsion there. It feels like there is and again, there's the whole sort of like lie builds upon lie, like a very, under different circumstances, a Stephen Glass story would make a great sitcom episode. I mean, you can see George Costanza doing something like
That's
this.
Right. He has to run around and pretend to be, Vandalay Industries.
But like, again, you get sort of caught in this spiral of lies that basically is going to inevitably unravel. I think about this in terms, like you said, these are really huge institutions of American journalism, these particular newspapers and magazines. And I got to be honest, another case that happened in the early aughts that we probably have to talk about, given his prominence right now, is the Dan Rather George W. Bush case.
Yes, this was the documents, the Killian documents.
The Killian documents that were so obviously made in Microsoft Word if you knew what Word was. But did Dan Rather and his producer, who were in their 60s and 70s, have any idea that if you put something together in Microsoft Word, it's going to automatically make superscript
and that proportional spacing and all these things that typewriters
in 1973
in 1973
obvious to anybody
didn't do.
Who was at that point, like, I was in my late 20s. I had done a lot of, work on, Microsoft Word. It was so obvious to me. And it makes you think to yourself, here's Dan Rather, this lion of American TV journalism, the sine qua non, like, anchor after Cronkite.
Yeah.
And he's taken in by this, takes responsibility, and then ends up really taking the fall for the entire situation.
Right. Now, he's not fabricating something, but he's falling.
He fell for a hoax.
He's falling for a hoax that conforms.
A dirty trick, a rat fuck in the sort of, Nixonian tradition, one could say.
Right. And that conforms with sort of, with the story that he wanted to tell. And this is, and rather too, talking about these, as you say, lions of mid 20th century journalism, Watergate era sort of heroes. Mm-hmm. He made his bones in Vietnam rather than Watergate, but big titan of sort of mid 20th century journalism.
Did the fax come through okay?
Yes, it did. I think the address must have gotten garbled. We can't find the site.
Okay, you want to read it back to me?
Sure. You gave us members.aol.jukedn.html.
Wait, was that an M?
I'm sorry?
After juked, was that an M as in Micronics?
No, it was an N. As in not working.
Try M.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I was just rushing.
Of course.
But I do find myself wondering, Stephen, why would a major software company put their website where only AOL members can access it as opposed to the entire web?
I have no idea. I don't have a website, so I don't really know that much about them. I would trust you guys to know better than me.
Okay.
I mean, all of these things, gosh, like the word I've been sort of trying to avoid saying, the phrase I've been trying to avoid saying all this time, it's the word of the year, right? Or the word of last year, fake news.
Yeah.
I'm trying to avoid saying it because it's simultaneously a real thing, and also, they have weaponized the claim of fake news now. And but just, in our age of Russian spam bots and Breitbart and 4chan and Google and Facebook being everybody's news source, the Janet Cook scandal starts to seem kind of quaint, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like it's not like a hostile foreign power subverted the election of the president of the United States is just a story about a kid that didn't exist.
But I think that when you look at scandals like these, especially the Rather one, they tend to kind of confirm among a certain portion of the population that all media is equally bankrupt.
Yes.
Morally, ethically, and that you might as well get your news from Alex Jones, because certainly the quote-unquote liberal media is not going to tell you the truth. And I have to say, like, it's not that I necessarily agree with people who get their news from Breitbart and Alex Jones, but what caused this sort of like lack of trust? I mean, biased accusations aside, which I think are hokum and bullshit and probably shouldn't be listened to.
Yeah.
But who controls these companies? It's the whole old network thing again. You know, it's like these media companies are controlled by huge conglomerates that have a corporate agenda that sometimes manages to change what we see on TV and how we see it. Not only that, but an agenda that, in the case of CNN, made their money from profiting off of war reporting, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can see why over the course of the 20th century, that high point at Watergate, it's the old Hunter S. Thompson, we could see when the wave broke back kind of thing. Like, after that, where do you go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think that we shouldn't understand this in terms of a Janet Cook or Stephen Glass. You see it even in the distance between how the Cook thing played out and the Stephen Glass thing played out is just 2 decades of, and it's been decade after decade of sort of the corrosion of the kind of institutional checks that are supposed to prevent this from happening.
Yeah.
And not even just the checks that are supposed to prevent this from happening, but like, you know, there's no way to talk about this without, again, I'm going to sound sort of starry-eyed and looking at the mid 20th century with these kind of rose-colored glasses, but the middle of the 20th century, I think that it's not foolish to talk about journalism as a profession and the fourth estate. It had an ideal, and a lot of the time lived up to its ideal of, you know, serving truth, objectivity, having a
social responsibility,
grand social responsibility, a civic function. I mean, if you take the really long view, that wasn't always true, right? Like, so Cook had
You've got Hearst, you've got yellow journalism. Yeah.
Cook had to give back her Pulitzer Prize. Well, who's Pulitzer? Joseph Pulitzer, you know, he's the inventor of yellow journalism. I mean, Hearst is the guy that takes it and runs with it a little bit more, but everything Hearst did, Pulitzer did first.
Mm-hmm.
They start the Spanish-American War and they invent comic strips and, you know, and
boy, that's a great sort of précis of exactly what's going on today, right? Give them blood and circuses, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And 19th century journalism was a wild frontier of like, it was like the internet, of a wild frontier of like opinionated cranks with, you know, in all of their little political tribes cranking out whatever their deal was. But Pulitzer, toward the end of his life, wants to redeem himself. And so he takes some of this huge fortune he made with yellow journalism. He founds the Columbia School of Journalism and he founds the Pulitzer Prizes. And in the sort of, as the 20th century goes on, journalism becomes a profession, and professions have their good points and their bad points. But the core of having a professional identity is that, you know, if you belong to the profession of journalism, you judge your success not by how many papers you sell, not by what your ratings are, but what your colleagues in the profession think of you. That you have this sort of, that there's a kind of, that the profession itself has an ideal that people try and follow.
Self-policing, essentially.
It's meant to be self-policing, and it's meant to be a different raison d'etre than the market. Now, these, you know, newspapers are still businesses, so it's always in tension, but they build this firewall between editorial and advertising in the newspaper industry. You know, and I think that if you want to criticize mid-20th century journalism, this is the period where you have the fewest voices, the smallest number of people. Yeah. You know, the 3 networks, the 2 newspapers, the establishment limits the number of people who can speak. But they do take seriously this civic duty, and you know, the kind of, what better example of that is there than Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein bringing down a corrupt president in Watergate.
I mean, I guess the lesson there, though, is that those two were not necessarily the highest names on the masthead at that time. They were kind of
right. No, they're fighting with They're fighting with Bradley, and they're fighting with, you know, and the owners of the Washington Post are also pushing back on then, but still, it's a success story for American
Sure.
journalism. But then
It's Horatio Alger, right? Yeah.
yeah, then, but you fast forward another 20, 30, 40 years, and it doesn't start with the internet. I mean, the internet amplifies this, but cable TV and media consolidation and all these things, yeah, we still pay lip service to all that great stuff, and everybody wants to be Bob Woodward, but maybe if the Stephen Glass files his story on time, and gosh, he's got these really great anecdotes, and it's gonna, that's gonna move some magazines, and it's gonna get a lot of clicks. So maybe you don't fact check it quite as much, and of course we don't have as many fact checkers as we used to have because of the budget cuts, and we don't have as many, and we don't have as many reporters on the street.
Everybody's pivoting to video, and so there's no text to read.
We're gonna pivot to video, and then all that is just like sort of hyper accelerated today. Where do you go when there's breaking news? You're getting the news fed to you by Zuckerberg's algorithms, right? And they are just as likely to pull shit from 4chan as from, they're not journalists at all.
Well, I mean, this is where you get to sort of this idea, like you were saying, of like so many voices, radical decentralization. Like, is there a positive that can come out of that? And I think about Twitter as sort of a place where people go for breaking news now.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of misinformation to sift through. But again, I think with Twitter, it's a little easier than Facebook or Google News or any of the others to self-curate, to pick sources that you trust. Now, obviously, that works both ways because you've got people in a bubble on the other side of things politically who have sources who objectivity is not necessarily highest on their list. But
just like, are those our only two choices? Like we can have, we can have Walter Cronkite, the national dad, telling us all how it is, or we can be up to our necks in the cesspool, right? I feel like there was supposed to be some other alternative.
Yeah, and I think that the point now is that with sort of capitalism and this sort of like very late decadent hyper-capitalist kind of thing, you're right. If it's that whole thing we're talking about with the sort of like local news going to, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like if there's no general interest, if the majority of the population does not want to read about this, they're not going to get that story out. But if it's a flashy conspiracy theory with, all kinds of things that like, reinforce your own prejudices and suppositions about the world, well, all of a sudden you're going to get a majority audience for something like that. And it's going to rise to the top because of these exact kind of algorithms that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I have these sort of romantic visions of some kind of,
what, Spider Jerusalem or
or I don't know. Yeah. Like,
because he's a rebel journalist who's got the backing of, at least at the beginning of the series, major newspapers, right? Like he's got that checks and balances you were talking about, even though he is a gonzo Hunter S. Thompson type. Even Hunter S. Thompson had Rolling Stone, which by the time the 80s rolls around is an institution in and of itself. So it's like, you're right. You need, if you want to have somebody with a real unique point of view, sometimes you need the backing of an institution to have them get their voice out there. But there's no more institutions anymore.
Yeah. This is a bummer. This is a bummer.
We are not going to solve the problems of 21st century journalism
wicked
tonight,
problems.
folks.
I'm not going to solve it tonight.
Are we going to have to play by the rules of the internet on the one hand or go extinct on the other?
Well, I would posit this question to it. I would say it's not the rules of the internet, it's the rules of commercialization, because the rationalization of newsroom resources predates the internet. These changes have been happening for a while, and the internet and new media technologies are simply serving those ends. They didn't start it. Well, why don't we ask a different question? Instead of asking what businesses want, why don't we ask what a well-functioning liberal democracy needs?
You know what my vision for saving journalism is? And I haven't, worked all this out, of course, but I actually think that WKRP contains some hints, because I do think that local journalism is the thing that has to be sort of saved.
Well, much like local politics, right? Like you got to
community journalism, and communities, in the sort of form of like, cities like Cincinnati, but also community can mean more than one thing. In the days of the internet, like we form communities,
sure,
and a world of thousands of little community access stations that serve different kinds of communities, but they can't be the whole logic of it can't be the market. There has to be some business model where there is another function that they serve, right? And it can't just be, we can't judge everything based on how much money it makes, because that, that's just the universal solvent that just dissolves everything.
One of the things that was always a fear that people like Nixon and Reagan had about PBS is that their news stories would show conservative administrations in a negative light, right? Like that was one of the big reasons why they were both paranoid about PBS. And PBS has never had that kind of like news presence. Like they had McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, which was a very straight-ahead kind of thing. Yeah. There was not a lot of editorializing going on there. But you look over at somewhere like Britain or even Canada, I would imagine, with the CBC, and you have a public broadcaster who is the paragon of journalistic institutions in those countries. And what's opposite them, especially in Britain, is the tabloid, is the for-profit newspaper.
Yeah.
And those, most of them lean right, some of them don't. But you have this sort of dichotomy between like staid old Auntie Beeb and like the newspapers out there that would push the boundaries. And like we've never had that dichotomy in the United States where there's been a public broadcaster opposed to private media.
Yes, right. And
a public broadcaster can do a lot positive for journalistic standards, let's say.
Yeah. So my vision, my unrealistic utopian vision or whatever, is to have like 10,000 little BBCs.
Yes.
Right? Because the problem with the BBC is that, again, it's the national dad. It's one voice telling you how it is. And that has, if you were alive in the 1950s or 60s, like that would be the thing that drove you crazy, right? And rightfully so.
Yes.
Is there a way to have many voices but not have it driven by counting clicks? I don't know.
I would be curious to see what the ownership stats are right now on local newspapers, not like city newspapers, but like town newspapers. Because I get the feeling that like Clear Channel and Gannett and a lot of these other big conglomerates have bought a lot of them and have closed down the ones that weren't profitable. And it gets right back to what you were talking about at the very outset of this, is that like, if you remove the profit motive, if you have some kind of like public media that operates at these, very local, very, personal level with people, then all of a sudden that you have something that, trust is the issue. It's what goes back to what we were talking about in this episode. It's like, how do you know who you can trust to deliver you accurate, truthful, honest news?
We've talked, another theme of this show has been public spaces, right? The disappearance of public spaces. In a way, these are public spaces. It's about the public sphere. And is there a public sphere separate from the marketplace?
Maxine! Oh, darling, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you. Listen, dear, now I'll tell you why I called. Last night, I went to sleep at 11:30. About half an hour before we were all supposed to stop smoking. Yeah, well, anyway, this morning I realized I have another half hour coming to me, and I just wanted to smoke one last cigarette, and, well, silly thing that I am, I threw every one of them out. Huh? Yeah, well, of course I took the pledge. No, you see, I had this other half hour coming. Well, I do, too. Oh, now, listen, Maxine, I don't want any of that holier-than-thou. Not from... Maxine? Maxine! Don't you dare hang up on me! Son of a bitch.
I do like the scene at the clinic because you get that sort of like... You remember that 1970s sort of like cliche in sitcoms, especially ones like Good Times or whatever, of like the harried, overworked social worker, like she's down there in the trenches, like she's taking care of widows and orphans and all this other stuff. That's the kind of vibe you get from this woman who is at the head of the office here at the clinic.
Yes, when Bailey goes there, the typewriters are all and the phones are ringing, so you know how busy they are saving kids,
Yes. And they're working under duress.
They're working under duress, right, in the trenches.
This actress was very, very familiar to me. Like, I identified her right away because she's been in a ton of stuff. She's a that gal, if we're going to go like that way. Barbara Kaysen, I believe it's pronounced.
Barbara Kaysen.
I think that if you watched the Showtime, it's Gary Shandling's show back in the 80s.
Yes.
That was a great, great show. And she played
such a great show.
Gary's mom in that, who was a great character. Yeah. She was also the head nurse on Trapper John MD, which this was on right around the same time as WKRP, and I think this I was actually watching when it was on, like, the networks. I think it was on CBS. But Barbara Kaysen is really good in this episode. Again, she doesn't have a ton to do, but she does, like, as you say, come and say that the clinic has been selling all these flower pictures to help them raise money for the clinic, thanks to this completely false story, which I thought was just delightfully pragmatic of her.
One dumb moment that I don't think was supposed to be funny, but Jennifer comes in and tells them that the Cincinnati Enquirer wants to run the radio story, and Andy says, "Verbatim?" Like that's the thing that he's excited about. It's a callback to the other episode. I find the use of Latin amusing.
Amusing, yes, exactly. Did you see where Andy kind of like has a little scene to himself in the bullpen? He goes over to a filing cabinet.
Yes. He goes to the filing cabinet, roots around in the filing cabinet, and pulls out a lollipop.
Is this like that bit in The Office where Dwight goes over to the filing cabinet and goes under the file for Mr. A knife and pulls a knife out to show he's constantly prepared? Like, is Andy like, is he trying to quit smoking? Is it like a Kojak situation? Is he like...
He's stashing it under filing it under L for lollipop. Hiding snacks around it may just be that they're trying to set up. He then goes and stands with his arms folded, looking like a tough guy with the rutabaga in one hand and a lollipop sticking out of his mouth. Sort of Kojak-like, as you say, because he's about to confront Les about he had told him not to do the rutabaga story.
You're right. It just might be like Gary Sandy's like, you know what? One prop isn't enough for the scene. I need two props.
Wants another prop. Oh, in that Hugh Wilson interview that I mentioned the other day.
Oh, yeah.
I watched a little more of it. There's one part where he's talking about the different cast members. And what he says about Gary Sandy is that Gary had all this energy and he was always moving around and he liked to move around and hop around and he was always bouncing around.
Oh, yeah. I can see that. Yeah.
And that Hugh Wilson tried to tell him he was like, heroes don't hurry, he said. He said John Wayne never hurried, and his notes to Gary Sandy was always slow down, stop moving around so much.
Huh.
Which I thought that was interesting. It's nice to those little details. It's kind of cool to hear. So he was telling him,
that's direction. I mean, that's like,
Yeah.
I mean, and you're right. Like, now that I think about it, like, he's definitely got a physical presence all the time, right?
He's always putting his knee up on things, and
but you're right. Like he doesn't enter the room Kramer style. He always kind of saunters in. I think he took that direction. Maybe that's why he got better. Maybe it was all Hugh Wilson.
Hugh Wilson calming him down. Could be. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.
Boy, we need something better to end on.
we need something. Yeah.
Jesus.
Funnier
I can't. Yeah, man. I'm trying to think of that. We have nothing positive to end on here. We should have saved rutabagas, Rob.